All right, welcome everyone. We are so happy to have you here for this QualLab lunch series in the summer of 2024, entitled World Building, Method Bending, Activist Approaches to Qualitative Research in This Moment and Beyond. My name is Shay Wesley Martin. My pronouns are they, them, and I am a graduate research associate in the QualLab in the College of Education and Human Ecology at The Ohio State University. We are just so happy that all of you have joined us today. We have four amazing panelists, and we are super excited to be in conversation with all of them. Just a quick overview of our agenda today. So it's pretty straightforward. So we're going to have a welcome from our QualLab director. We'll do a little bit of housekeeping, let you know how this will run. I will introduce our dynamic panelists. We'll have a dialogue. Toward the end of our conversation, we'll open it up for audience questions in a Q&A. And then at the end, we'll tell you a little bit more about the QualLab and how you can get involved. And so now I'm going to turn it over to our director, Dr. Penny Pasquet.
Thank you so much, Shay. I just have to give props to you for someone who has envisioned this event and been planning it for months, also doing it in such a way that has been extremely caring with the entire team, working with everyone, and we all have our parts and aspects to everything. So thank you so much for all the incredible work. Welcome to the QualLab Methodology Center. We are an exciting group of qualitative scholars. We have so much on our dashboard of resources, and Shay will tell you a little bit more about that as we go. Today, I want to make sure that we start by really acknowledging the land that we come from here in Central Ohio, and we certainly support the land acknowledgement developed by the Ohio State University's Office of Diversity and Inclusion. Land acknowledgements really should be more than performative, but engage our historical presence as well as our local communities. Also consider that local lands in the global South and North, the global East and West, these are local communities to people. So I encourage you to educate yourselves on the historical presence of all the lands that you care about. Here at the QualLab Methodology Center, we certainly acknowledge the traditional homelands here in Central Ohio of the Shawnee Nation, Miami, Wyandotte, and many indigenous nations who have extremely strong ties to this land. There's been a long history of violent and harmful research on indigenous communities, and as opposed to with indigenous communities. I know that has changed for some, and indigenous communities are doing amazing work in terms of research. So I would encourage everyone to go far beyond, do no harm with the research that you engage in. So with that, thank you so much. And I'm going to pass it on to Shay. Oh, and I can keep going. All right, well, QualLab. So we are a methodology center here at Ohio State. We have content knowledge of multiple approaches, and so sometimes the traditional is what people want, and that's fine, but we also really focus on the advancing some of the qualitative approaches that I think are cutting edge, and that's what our QualLab lunch approaches really are about. Consultation information is on our website. We have a whole dashboard of resources. We have this lunch series. Please I encourage you to go to the website and see some of the things that the GRAs over the past few years have developed and put there for you, as well as other series, including unapologetic educational research toward equity, diversity, anti-Blackness, racism, and white supremacy in research. So there's quite a bit there for you. And I think now might be when I pass it back to Shay. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pasquet. I appreciate that. So before we jump into the rest of our time together, I want to invite us to just take a collective deep breath. There's a lot happening in the world, a lot that we'll talk about. today. But I also think part of what makes this work sustainable and helps us continue on in doing it is being able to center ourselves and ground ourselves in what is important and what's around us. So just take some time, take a deep breath in and out. Feel free to stretch a bit and make sure that you are taking good care of yourselves as we are engaging, because it could be a tough conversation. It is definitely tough work, and taking good care is super important as we engage. So the chat space is turned on for this webinar. Part of that being turned on is going to be just an invitation to dialogue in community, ask questions, and offer wonderings aloud in real time as we engage in this dialogue. Feel free to share any questions or comments using the chat space. Toward the end of our chat, I mentioned this earlier, we will invite questions to the panel from those watching this dialogue. The QualLab team will surface the questions from the chat for our panelists. This session is being recorded and you can access it on our YouTube channel after the session. Closed captioning is provided during the session. You can access it by clicking live transcript on the lower right corner of your own video box, not video box, but just on your Zoom box. Feel free to turn it on and off so that you can meet your accessibility needs. And with that, I have a really cool thing that I get to do, and this distinct pleasure to introduce the panelists that we have for our conversation today. And so from kind of left to right, we have Dr. Wilson Okello, who is an assistant professor of higher education at Penn State University. He's also a research associate at the Center for the Study of Higher Education and the director of the Black Study in Education Lab. Dr. Okello is a transdisciplinary artist and scholar who is concerned with how Black critical approaches make visible the epistemic foundations that structure what it means to be human and imagining otherwise possibilities for Black being therein. He is widely published and is the author of the forthcoming text with SUNY Press on Blackness, liveliness, and what it means to be human toward Black specificity in higher education. Dr. Michiko Hikida is an associate professor of elementary language arts in the College of Teaching and Learning at The Ohio State University. Her scholarship examines how classroom languaging practices mediate personhood and literacy, teaching, and learning events. Her goal is to make classrooms more joyful and humanizing for students, particularly for students on the margins, including students of color, bi/multilingual students, LGBTQIA+ students, and students identified as learning disabled or, quote, struggling, unquote, readers. Dr. Leigh Patel is a writer, educator, cultural worker, and elder care provider. She focuses on the ways that schooling acts as an efficient delivery system for intertwined dispossessions and the fact that education is an essential tool for liberation. Her walk-on song is Can I Kick It by A Tribe Called Quest, which is a fantastic song. Dr. Pauline Lipman is a professor of educational policy studies and director of the Collaborative for Equity and Justice in Education at the University of Illinois, Chicago. Her research focuses on the relationship of education policy, white supremacy, racial capitalism, the coercive state, and the neoliberal urban restructuring and possibilities for a new, radically democratic economic and political social order. She is an activist scholar and a core member of Teachers for Social Justice. She's been involved in struggles around school closings, education privatization, and for elected school board, sustainable community schools, and racial justice in education. So please help me welcome these amazing panelists. I am so excited for this conversation, and those bios are amazing. So I'm excited for what is to come. So to start off, I want to kind of ground us in an opening question, right? And so in my research, I approach kind of thinking about qualitative inquiry through lenses of like queer of color critique, Black study, Black feminist tradition. And one of the through lines in all of these camps is a commitment to archive, a commitment to community, and kind of this intentional invocation of those who have come before and those who have come after. And so as we kind of begin our dialogue, I wanted to invite all of us to invoke the people, moments, and places that have driven us or are crafting us in our work. And so this is to all of you. As you enter this conversation, who or what are you bringing with you? And who or what informs your orientation to your work in this moment?
Happy to lead us off. Thank you so much, Shay. Thank you, Dr. Pasquale. Thank you, the entire, I'll say, QualLab team. It is truly a privilege to be in conversation with this phenomenal panel. Who am I bringing with me? I really appreciate the beautiful question. Love to Sylvia Winter and what it means to be human, to Catherine McKittrick on being human as praxis, and Hortense Spillers and Christina Sharp and the capaciousness of the ordinary, and Sadia Hartman and the afterlife, for the invitation by Hartman to look again and again and again to locate living in the quotidian, and June Jordan and Amiri Baraka. Yes, we want a Black poem, to Tina Campt in her meditations on listening and the politics of a Black gaze, from the passive optics of looking at to the active struggle of looking with, through, and alongside, to Art Jaffa and Kevin Kwashi for his invocation to Black worlds and world making, and to Sean Crawley for his orientation to otherwise, for Zora Neale Hurston and her charting of Negro expression, for Simone Lees and Sonia Sanchez's How Do It Free Us, to Dominique Hill and Darrell Collier for their love and patience, to Ruth Brown and Cynthia Dillard and Alexis Gumbs and Lucille Clifton, won't you celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and failed. For Audre Lorde and Toni Morrison's clearing, for the plot within the plantation, for the swamps and the forests of marinage that gave way to Black futurity, for Octavia Butler and Parable of the Sower. Prodigy is, at its essence, adaptability and persistent. Without positive obsession, she writes, there's nothing at all. Ashe.
Ashe. I'm gonna let that chat just bubble and glow. Adding my thanks, Shay, for your invitation, your design of this space, your bringing together of people. I certainly, literally am bringing my mother into this space. I am in her home. I was just checking on her. I bring in a tradition of matriarchy into this space. I bring in a tradition of collectivism that can breathe in the matriarchal spaces, can breathe in the sibling spaces, can actually wobble and feel with gender in many, many ways, can perform that. So I bring in the ways that Harney and Moten also gift us the undercommons. I bring in the side passages. I bring in certainly Robin D.G. Kelley and all of his reminders of the ways that we should think seriously about whether higher education can be an engine for social change and ground everything, to loop in. Penny, thank you so much for that opening. There's so many things in how we are doing what we're doing, and grounding it so much in who we are doing it with. Who are we walking alongside? So as we bring and invoke, Dr. Okello, thank you so much for invoking so many names. I'll add a few more. Arundhati Roy, Kakali Bhattacharya, Patricia Kruger-Henney, Monique Guichard. I'm intentionally trying to lift up some people to, and you have like a lit, the clutch. So I want to lift up some people who don't usually get lifted in these spaces, who have been absolutely essential to participatory action research, for example. So as we think about, as I'm arriving in this space, I'm settling into with my breath and joining all of you, and just honored and humbled. Let's take a walk with each other figuratively. Let's see where we go. I'm excited to loop in and out of each other's comments. Thank you.
Oof. Let's see. Thank you guys. Oh my goodness. I think I bring my sister. She's the person who brings me to my work. She is my half sister. We have the same mom, but different dads, and her dad is an enrolled member of the Taos tribe in Taos, New Mexico. We grew up in the same home. We both had a hard time learning how to read, and we had very different experiences in school. My sister was kicked out of every school she attended. My dad used to say that it's lucky we don't have the same last name, because otherwise I would have followed in her footsteps. But I recognize that I have a Japanese name, and the privilege that comes with that has shaped my journey differently than it has shaped hers. And so that is the place from which I come. I come from a place of liminality, where I am a multiracial person and never belong anywhere. I'm always never quite enough. I am moved by Maxine Green and her invitation for imagination, for Kevin Kumashiro as another Asian scholar who does really critical work and showed me that that is something that I could do, to Reverend Angel Kyoto Williams, and Adrienne Marie Brown for thinking about prophecy as speaking truth to power in the moment, and for thinking about emergent strategies. And thank you guys for just creating this space. Oh my gosh, I'm so moved already.
I want to also make sure, Pauline, if you wanted to say anything, you could.
Oh, yes. Sorry. I'm just settling with everything everyone has said. Well, I can't really follow all that. But I need to say today that as an anti-Zionist Jew who was raised in the spirit of justice, that I bring with me the persistent Palestinian struggle for liberation. And its interconnection with our collective liberation. I bring with me all my comrades who I've been engaged in many struggles with, some of whom have died, some of whom were assassinated by the state, but who struggled their whole lives. I especially bring with me the mothers and community members and teachers who I've learned so much from, and work shoulder to shoulder with in Chicago in the many struggles that we've been involved in. And I'm not going to evoke more names. Those names are very powerful and are sitting with me. But I would like to evoke Leila Khaled, who is a really important Palestinian revolutionary over 70 years.
Thank you all so much. As we enter into this conversation, I am holding all of those names and moments and places. I am going to invoke what I consider to be the auditory kind of crux of who I am, which is the intersection of gospel and go-go. Shout out to the DMV. I also want to invoke two names that are really important to me and ground me in everything I do, and that is Malachi Welch and Kwame Jones, who are both two young Black boys who I taught in my first year of teaching who did not make it to graduation. And so as we enter into this conversation about what is possible through schooling and education and through qualitative research, I want to remember those who are not able to be here in this moment because of violence, because of the system in which we all exist and have existed in for a while. And so with that, as we are jumping in, so this conversation is about activist approaches to qualitative research, right? And I know that we all might have different feelings or orientations to the word activism, especially as it relates to scholarship and research, right? And so I would love to open it up to you all, and feel free to jump in, jump out of the conversation, but how do you feel about the label of scholar activist, or even the notion of being able to have an activist approach to research in the academy?
I don't mind getting us started if that's okay with others. So I thought about this in three different ways. I appreciate the question because it's something that I'm both drawn to and like at the same time. I'm drawn to it in the sense that I am quite comfortable with knowing that all ways of knowing, also known as research, also known as methodology, all are political. All have inextricable ancestries that come before them. All are creating future worlds as they act, as we do, as we know, as we unknow, unlearn. So I'm very comfortable with that, which I think goes hand in hand with being explicit about my politics. So that's what draws me to that term, and what makes it is when we bring it up in the academy, because in like modernity and westernized versions of the academy, which all four of us who are on this panel, and Shay, you as well, and the QualLab is creating spaces within and of also, there is an undeniable individualism in westernized academy, and that is an absolute incommensurability with activism, social change for better futures, better right nows. So that's my draw and my with the activist scholar term. I'll also just add, I have if you can't, like, talking really loosely, so I'm sorry if it's not more composed for you, and also you're welcome that it's not more composed for you. I really appreciate Stuart Hall saying when he retired from being paid by his university and then hopefully continue to be paid by whatever university he retired from. It's like, oh goodness, now I can go back to being a public intellectual. I can stop being a scholar. And I think there's that gesture to productivity in there that also is important too, that is part of like, this has to do with racial capitalism and individualism. So I don't get to be with people as easily when I'm in an economy of ego.
I feel a lot of tension around that phrase, scholar activist. I think for a lot of the reasons that Dr. Patel just mentioned. I think it's hard to dismantle it's hard to dismantle the institution that pays for my housing, for my healthcare, for my food, because this is just a neoliberal construct. And so because of that neoliberalism, I am stuck between the dissolution of the institution that I recognize as racist and capitalistic and predatory, and my ability to feed myself. And so I always feel that tension, and also recognize that sometimes you just have to take it apart and build something new in its place. And I don't know what that looks like, but I definitely feel the pull in that direction, which, maybe means leaving the academy. It's hard to say. I feel Dr. Hall's comment that Dr. Patel shared about finally getting to be an activist when you leave the academy.
I could jump in. Yeah, I appreciate what both of you have said. So I I was an organizer and an activist long before I became an academic. And so I've never really thought of myself as an academic in that, but I mean, which does not mean I can escape the reality of being in the institution, right? But I ended up in the academy, and I don't need to go into why, but as another way to do the work that I was doing with a different sort of skill set at a particular moment. So I've always looked at being in the university space in that way, which is not to say that it's not fraught with all the complexities that everyone says and has said already, and more, and is getting worse every day because of the attack on what we do, and also because of the intensified neoliberalization of the university. But I think, so, you know, the term activist scholar is like something that I think it was in my bio that I actually use. And I feel the way you do about it, Leigh, but I've come to a place of saying that I think that if we're going to be in the university, we actually have to claim that term. And the reason that we have to claim that term is that we need to claim a space in the academy that gives us a platform to do whatever we're doing. And that's a way to not just defend ourselves, but defend all the scholars that are coming up. So as long as we want to be in the university, we need sort of to legitimate our role to the extent that we can, so that we can do the work that we need to do. And so I think that term gives us a framing. I want to read something super short, it's just one sentence, that Vijay Prashad wrote about Gramsci, talking about the new intellectual. And Gramsci calls these, this is quoting Prashad now, Gramsci calls these intellectuals the new intellectuals who throw themselves into active participation in practical life as constructor, organizer, permanent persuader. The permanent persuader, the new intellectual, Gramsci notes, is a person who's devoted to working to alleviate the grievances of the people, to elaborate popular consciousness, to push the suffocating narrowness of thought outwards, and to make more and more space for popular struggles to sustain themselves and win. And in the end, he says, they're invested in the struggles of the oppressed, essentially, and they're certainly clear about the need to fight to build a post-capitalist society. So that's sort of the definition of quote unquote activist scholar that I aspire toward. And that's where I've landed on this right now. I've grappled with it for a long time.
Yeah, I really appreciate the.
Can I say something? I'm sorry. Come on, can we talk with each other till I'm like, should I just keep myself unmuted so I can make sounds? No, I'm sorry. I just was thinking like how moving it is just to be with each other in this tension. And I'm sorry, Wilson, may I call you Wilson? Is that all right? Thank you. And you call me Leigh, and everybody calls me Leigh, and we do that. That would be cool. Yeah, it's so fantastic to have some company, and like, how do we understand claiming space like the classroom? And Wilson, I definitely wanted to say this, sorry, with you. Also, like Audre Lorde, what Audre Lorde teaches us about the classroom. Like the university is no paradise, but the classroom is amazing. Thank you for letting me speak with you right before you spoke, and right after you, Pauline.
Stay in. No, stay off mute. I appreciate where the conversation is going, and you know, I think there's when I think about this term, I think there's the politics of naming, I think, which we all understand that's really important. And then I think there's what happens in academia, where we love to put name on things. We love to call ourselves a certain thing, or we love to sort of give terms to things that have perhaps long existed in the archive, to echo Shay. So when I think about this idea of scholar activists, I'm thinking about the work of Black creatives, right? And their engagement with these sort of recursive logics that we've been talking about, and more than just their engagement with it, and how they structure society, governance, or ways of living, but how they breach these recursive logics, right? How they call on publics to notice and disrupt these particular structures. I'm thinking about Edris Danticott and her powerful text, Create Dangerously, the immigrant artist at work. It reminds us that we should all imagine otherwise, right? Not just for this pomp and circumstance, which I think can sometimes happen in academia, but for the purpose of creating anew the world that we want. She says the process of creating art that tells the truth requires courage, it requires faith and an understanding of the greater good, recognizing that the individuals that she names often risked everything up to and including their lives so that folks might have an opportunity to remember who we are as people, right? So creating dangerously, for me, is about how we close the gap between who we say we are and what our work does, right? Like I was trained to think about closing this gap between what I say I do and who I say I am, right? Like who am I versus what do I do? I was implored to consider this sort of consistency. Is there congruence in your work, right? Don't worry about the terms. Don't worry about calling yourself a Black feminist. Don't worry about calling yourself someone committed to Black study. Don't worry about calling yourself a scholar, activist, artist, or whatever sort of label or term you want to attach to yourself, but what is the work doing, right? But I was invited to sort of think about and how I sort of think about this idea of scholar activist, which is to say I don't, right? If someone wants to sort of put that in my orbit, okay, but I think for me, the greater concern, and I would sort of implore us as we think about the greater concern, is to ensure that our ethics, our values, our doing matches what we say it is that we're about, both publicly and privately, because folks show up in public in ways that they don't show up in private. So for example, I'm talking about sort of Black feminism as an activist posture. What does my family say about my Black feminist tendencies? Not sort of how I sort of name them in a public space. What are those, who are those, how do those close to me understand? And how are they affected by what it is that I say I do in those spaces? Just thinking about congruence.
I really appreciate all of you sharing, particularly this idea of, I think, Wilson, what you just said, the politics of naming, right? Especially in the academy. I think for me, I've been sitting with the tension that I feel with the word activist, with that label. And mostly where I've settled is that I hate the term for me, right? And the reason that I say I hate it is because I think that there's so much politics in that term, right? And it also has been used to attack scholars, right? To attack students in this moment, used as a label to label someone as a troublemaker, right? Which, some people like being that label. I love that label, right? But like, I think about who gets to claim activism, right? Because for some folks, right, activism is an option. You can opt in to activism. You can opt into caring about social change. And what some people might call activism, I call just trying to stay alive, right? And so I think about the research that I do, right, when I'm looking at queer and trans youth of color in this country and more broadly, and my work is less about activism, or I wouldn't call it activism. I call it just trying to make sure that kids get to become adults who get to become elders, right, in this country, which is less about claiming a title, right? It's less about making sure a positionality statement is solid and more about just the work of living, right? Just the work of living and ensuring that other people can live alongside me, can continue to walk alongside me, think alongside me, grow alongside me in community, right? And so for me, I always feel a little bit uneasy when I get labeled as an activist or a scholar activist, because it is really just the act that I'm doing is an act of living, right? Of trying to live and trying to ensure that people like me, right? That kids like me can live in such a violent, incredibly violent world, right? And also understanding that living and that survival is also dependent on the survival of others, right? And so fighting for all of that, and trying to get to it through research. And so I know that I know that the term activist is a loaded term, and that's why we had this conversation at the beginning, because there are so many levels, especially right now, right, where people are, like I said, being targeted and attacked and all the things for their beliefs, right, and being called an activist in a derogatory way. And so I wanted to make sure that we all got to kind of share our orientations to this term that we're using to frame this conversation. And so with that, I'm going to just shift a little bit, right? And so something that I really appreciate about qualitative research, and if you're a quant researcher and you're on this call, welcome. We're happy to have you, even though you're a quant person. So what I appreciated though about qual is this malleability of methods, and really the open invitation to rethink what is possible in the field. And I wondered if we could have kind of an open conversation about how each of your community organizing or activism or living helps you rethink what is possible in qualitative research. And with that, feel free to contextualize it in this moment. So what about this moment energizes you? And what about this moment worries you when it comes to research and inquiry?
You all staying on mute. Yes, I'm calling you in. So I'll get us started, but I really would love to be in conversation with all of you and Shay. And I'm so appreciating. I've had Joy James invoked in the chat, Sarah Ahmed. When you mentioned troublemakers, Shay, I thought immediately, of course, of Carla Shalaby and how the troublemakers in school, if we are able to listen outside of the methodology that has socialized us to hear trouble instead of calls for freedom. This moment, methodology, qualitative methodology, what energizes and worries me are, of course, I think probably, hopefully for all of us, hinged to each other, what worries us and energizes us. I am deeply worried that the vast majority of what we know about Gaza is coming from people who are under constant attack and who are incredibly alive while they are conveying the ways that they are being killed, an active live genocide in front of our eyes. I am tremendously worried about the lack of saying Palestine, of course, and the lack of understanding that all of our liberations are intertwined with each other. I'm deeply worried and enlivened about the ways that qualitative ways of knowing. I'm going to resist methodology a little bit too, just because I was called a methodologist for a long time. I'm like, don't you have things that you do and a how? Also, why am I being on so many committees? Which has to do with labor and the economy of ego and all those things. But just jumping out of the institution back out and back in, one of the beautiful things about qualitative research is its attention to detail, its story, its writing. To know anything about Shay, a really wonderful thing, of course, is the power of Shay's writing. That is first how I got to know you, Shay, and first how I heard in my soul, in my mind, you talk about living as a deep, deep form of radicalness. And that's when you gave us the questions, I kept putting radical in because it just kept overriding activism for me. I'm like, being a radical. And there are ways of being a radical, and that requires so much unlearning. And that also is part of what very much enlivens me and worries me when we are not vulnerable to unlearning, when we're not open to getting it wrong, because then we try less. And there, of course, I'm bringing in Ruthie Wilson-Gilmore into our great company that we have. So that's my ramble bramble to get us started. Wilson is off mute.
I was just off mute to be an amen. That's it. No, I'm agreeing with you. I think about, again, thinking about Black creatives, and I'm also thinking about this idea of study and Black study as an invitation that might compel us to do more than map violence, right? So, I appreciate you, Leigh, for naming the terror, right, that we're witnessing in Gaza. And I'm trying to think about what it means that the individuals that you're calling on, the individuals who are experiencing this, are also enunciating life, and putting forth enunciations of liveliness. And so I think if we could learn anything, or take note of anything in this moment, it would be the ways in which individuals are experiencing terror, and simultaneously not succumb to terror, right? They're thinking about the ways we might still enunciate the what else, right? That the breath of living that might put forth an emancipatory imagination. I think if we're not careful, though, I think we can slip into this. So I think what can happen too easily, I think, with research, particularly in the neoliberal academy, is that we can get caught up in this need for outcomes and evidence. And these aren't necessarily bad words, but I wonder about the ways that constrains our imagination, right? Or our ability to see others imagining life and otherwise ways of being for themselves, right? We can become complicit, I think, in problems that we are very much seeking to address, right? And so how do we ensure that our work remains transformative, right? Which I think is some of the current energy that we're witnessing. But how do we stay committed to the liveliness that others are encouraging us to think about in this moment? And so, yeah, would offer that.
And this reminds me of Grace Lee Boggs, and that really what we're always trying to do is become more human beings, because we're, at least right now, we're speaking from a settler colony that created its growth at the expense of humanity.
I think I've been thinking a lot about where my gaze is. And so I think, Wilson, this is sort of building on what you were talking about, liveliness. And so I've been doing a lot of what we're calling right now reconstructive discourse analysis. So looking at how moments of emancipation and transformation are made manifest in and through language, in classrooms specifically, in my work. But the way we specifically do not call it positive discourse analysis, because we feel like when you call it positive, it paints this overly rosy picture where you don't attend to the oppressive systems that are there. Like, we have to recognize that they are there, and being able to shift our gaze to the ways that people are building their lives, and to lift those moments up, even when they are really brief, and to say that they matter. And I think that in research writ large, those micro moments can be dismissed as like, oh, well, it was like a 2-minute conversation. And I would argue that, yes, it's a 2-minute conversation in which somebody was humanized, in which life was breathed into that interaction. And those moments collect over time. And that's the way we build toward something new. I think about Octavia Butler, I think about Parable of the Sower, and each of those seeds we plant, and we can cultivate. And if I understand how life, how that liveliness comes to be in and through language, then I hope that we can continue to grow that. And I see that in art. Absolutely, that beauty and that focus on what is beautiful without discounting what is hard and what is dehumanizing. Yeah.
I just want to add one thing to what everyone has said. It's hard to add anything at this point. But, you know, I was thinking about this from starting from my own experience in research, organizing, intertwined experience. And so if we think about qualitative research, I don't think, just to kind of reframe the question, I don't know if it's the opportunity of qualitative research, but it's the opportunity of using our inquiry and dialogical skills in relation with struggles that are going on right now and have been going on, to think about that, in my experience, that what it gives us, not gives us, but creates an opportunity for, is to actually build a much more powerful understanding of what I think I would frame, you all have been talking about, which is the dialectic of oppression and resistance, the dialectic of violence and various forms of fighting for life, asserting life and resistance. And so, you know, it's really through not just the experience, but the knowledge systems, the theorizing of the folks that I've worked with fighting against dispossession, against school closings, against expropriation of their land, their neighborhoods, their lives, that we can construct some kind of knowledge that's not a knowledge to be consumed by readers of academic journals, but a knowledge that can be constructed together that helps us figure out how to continue to struggle. And so I think that's the value of it. Ruthie Gilmore has that, for me, really important quote when she's talking about the very topic that we're talking about now, which is that she says that we have I think she uses the term precious opportunity to bring together the cross-cutting knowledge of different movements, et cetera. So at this moment, for me, what is critical, and I might be jumping ahead in our questions, but I can't help it, that I think what's critical is that we link what is local, what is micro, to these larger systems and these larger struggles because people are already making those connections, and that's what has to be lifted up. People see today, and that's what inspires me about not just the incredible movements that have arisen, but the consciousness that see the interconnection between the day-to-day, between the housing, the jobs, the state violence, anti-Black state violence, and the disintegration of this racial capitalist system. They're making the connections to the struggle for Palestine. And so I think those are the sort of spaces and opportunities that are available to us. If we think about qualitative research, quote unquote, I mean, I don't even use the term qualitative research, but yeah, I don't know. I don't have language for it. I mean, it's just like, let's do some work to help move the struggle forward, basically. But if we think about our work in that way, I was kind of rambling, but it's, I want to get at that point somehow.
You know, something that I think is really interesting. So I have two thoughts. The first thing is I noticed that, Pauline, you're the second person to say I'm rambling. And I want to invite us to shift that, to just say that we're going on the journey with you, right? I think that there are moments along the way, right, where like I'm like, yes. And I know people are all saying that, and rambling for me is just a journey. And I so appreciate you inviting us on that journey together. When I was thinking about the connection between community organizing and my work outside of research to research, I thought back to a pandemic birthday party that I went to. And I don't know if you'll remember, but like the Zoom parties that we used to have where everyone would bring like a drink or their food to the screen. And it was like both really sad, but also exciting because you hadn't seen people in like a week. And so when Zoom, when the pandemic first happened, I want to shout out my friend Dr. Kimberly Parker, who is at Harvard. She has a little beautiful boy, and he invited me to his birthday party, right? As the only adult in this Lego birthday party. I love Legos, and I was invited to this birthday party, right? And so there's this Lego master who's giving us a theme, and I'm like really nervous about it because I'm up against kids, and like I feel like kids have more experience and more expertise with Legos, right? And so the theme is Star Wars, and I'm really serious about it. I have my Legos, and I actually asked my wife to help me build it because I was like, I need to win. Can you please help me build it, right? And so like we're working together, and there's like a 3-year-old, right, who's like spinning on the ground, right? And like not really building anything. So it's time to present. And I'm like, I'm gonna go second to last because I know that I've won, right? I know like I got this, right? Star Wars, I got it. Mind you, this kid is turning 7 or 8, right? So like no one else cares about this. And the first kid goes, and the kid's like, I built this. And I'm like, what is, in my head, I'm like, what is that, kid, right? And the kid's like, it's Mickey Mouse in space. And my adult brain, right, my competitive adult brain was like, Mickey Mouse is not in Star Wars, right? Mickey Mouse is not in like this. None of this makes sense. This is not on theme. This doesn't make any sense, right? And my wife had to remind me, like, one, like, Shay, you're at a kid's birthday party, but two, like, these kids can decide whatever is possible, right? And I think about that all of the time in my work, right? When it comes to research, right? Kids remind me, especially Black kids, especially kids of color, especially queer and trans kids who are constantly imagining worlds and imagining futures in incredibly violent and hostile world. And they're creating beautiful things and things that I could have never even imagined or seen or thought about all the time within classrooms and outside of classrooms, right? And so when I think about what is possible through research, I think about that Star Wars Lego challenge, right? Where this kid was like, Mickey Mouse is hanging out with Luke Skywalker in space, and I only used 3 Lego pieces. And I'm like, how? What is happening, right? But that's a reminder that that's possible, right? And so I think for me in my work, kids, especially queer and trans kids of color, are always reminding me of what is possible, right? And to broaden it, because I think that the academy, especially in this moment in the world, part of that, right? Part of the work of the Violent Academy is to limit what we think is possible. And so for me, I am so grateful to the children and the kids and the youth in my life for reminding me to disrupt that idea of impossibility, and reminding me that everything that we do, whether it's my methods or how I'm orienting to the work, it does not have to be legible, right, to be possible. And so I appreciate that. And I appreciate you all going with me on that journey back in time to that Star Wars party where I definitely won the challenge, but we're not going to go into that. There was no prize or anything like that, but let's just say I won. So thinking about, right, the connections between community organizing or like outside the academy and inside the academy, right? So all of us exist as kind of scholars within this neoliberal academy. And I think that oftentimes when we're doing these like organizing or having these community relationships outside of the academy, so much of what exists there is rooted in accountability. And I think that accountability to community is often at odds with the goals or the expectations of the academy. And so I wonder to you all, like, how do you reconcile this in your own approach to research, in your own work that you do every day?
This is not really addressing your question, Shay, but I actually want to pivot slightly back to the praxis I think you just offered us, and to invite everyone sort of to respond to this, mostly because I'm curious. But I think part of how we get at locating the imagination of Legos or kids with Legos is this sort of quieting of the ego and this pause, right? This deep sort of pausing. And so how is it that you all think about what it means to, as I'm saying, let the child lead the way, right? But to come alongside folks who are doing this imagining in ways that might allow you to locate more than, you know, just kids at play, but locate the genius sort of within it.
I think of the work of Bronwyn Davies and her work on emergent listening, and like not imposing our expert minds on their beginner exploration. And that is something I continually come back to as a reminder of this. And I think trusting participants and children that they know what they're doing. I think oftentimes people think that that young people don't know what they're doing. And I would argue that it's very rare that a kid does something random. It's always rooted in something. And so trusting that and then making it my responsibility to figure out what that is, I think is something that I hold on to. That's a beautiful question. Thank you for asking that.
Oh, yes. And I was thinking about this when you were talking, Shay. Thank you for raising that question. So, you know, when we were collaborating with community organizations, and we were actually part of a coalition, fighting against the school closings in Chicago, and they closed 50 schools, mostly in Black communities. And we talked with folks who we knew, who we've been working with, who were fighting those school closings. And our focus was, what do you imagine for your schools? So the thing is that so much of so-called critical research, so we tried to follow the leadership of Eve Tuck on this question about damage research. And so much of the kind of research that's done is actually, so we critique all the systems, right? But actually there are alternatives, and those alternatives are being imagined by and shaped by the people who are being affected by them. And it's those perspectives that are not being lifted up. And so I think that it really calls upon us to, in whatever kind of work that we're doing, to lift up the imagining, the visions, what Robin Kelley calls the freedom dreams, if you will, of the people who are actually facing these issues right now. And that's something that I think has really pretty much guided me ever since we did that original work.
Can I go back to Legos for a second?
Good.
Just for a second. So my mother and I figured out that we don't see blue or green the same way by trying to make this orchid with Legos. And I want to also bring us to, I'm kind of going back to how Wilson said, can we just back up here for a second? We talk? There's unfolding all the time. There's emerging all the time. Yes, there's a reason why I still am really drawn to people who are 13 years old, 12 years old, 14 years old, because although there's a lot of volume with it, and I love the volume, they are constantly saying, that's unfair, that's not right. I'm like, yep, you're absolutely right. Like, I hear you just fine because you're screaming, so maybe take a step back. But there's unfolding all the time. My mother has told me things in her 88th year of being in this life that neither one of us thought we would be hearing these words from her mouth. So I just want to also open up like the curiosity that unfolds constantly. And that if we can, and I do think stillness helps so much in that. I'm so happy that Kevin Quashie was invoked earlier. I think that stillness helps so much in pausing. It also helps us to this accountability, because I believe that all manner of sins are done under this word community. I'm always a bit cautious when community is said, like when somebody's working with community, and when that's done in university settings, when that's done in academic settings, I just listen more, because I want to hear who is the community and where are they? Are they walking alongside? Are you walking alongside? How is the relationship? What is the quality of the relationship? And of course, that's also something that we are all indebted to, and we get the heritage and the legacy and the responsibility of being answerable to what we've been gifted by so many indigenous peoples, communities, families, of how are we answerable to what we've been gifted? How are we answerable to people who have come together? How are we answerable, for example, to remembering that the nuclear family is a really, really baby concept. It is an incredibly baby concept, that we didn't always need this in front of generationality. We didn't need this. The generations have been together far longer than they've been little nuclear families. So part of how we say part of how I understand of like this incommensurability between doing work in community, which means with community, which means figuring out how am I answerable and part of this community? What do they need from me, which can include shutting up and listening. And then how I communicate that through publications or through my teaching, or really more so how I get to learn with people in classroom spaces, how I get to learn with others as we're figuring out what we know by writing it and rewriting it, and being okay with everything that we say and everything that we write is unfinished. It's all draft, and we keep working and we keep trying. We will make mistakes, we will mess up. How do we care for each other? I think I'll try to stick some kind of temporary landing here, which I also say unapologetically, it's a temporary landing. I ramble unapologetically because we're walking, right? I might have lost my stuck landing there. I do think there's something in how we are with so many different ways of knowing. There's something with how are we with ways of knowing that unsettle us, that agitate us. What are we learning about ourselves from that? So in community, when there's rupture, what are we learning about how we are with that rupture? So just constant, what's the quality of the relationship? How do we work over and over and over again on being in a right relation?
Something that I have been thinking about since you asked the question, Wilson, and then it came up again when Pauline was talking and then when Leigh was talking, is just about what we have named, and what I see and continue to sit with is a tension between what we know, what we believe, what we want, what communities want, what is right, and also what exists, right? And the reality of where we sit in the academy, right? And so I heard you invoke Kevin Quashie and stillness, right? And if there is any place that I feel like cannot be still, it is within the academy, right? I think that there is a lot of work that is done to fill our time with critique and with defense and with trying to navigate systems that are designed to stifle our creativity and our imagination, right? And so, Pauline, when you were talking about thinking, kind of uplifting these alternatives from communities who have been dreaming and who have been scheming and figuring out ways to exist outside of these institutions, I was like, yes, absolutely yes. And then I come back to a comment I think that Michiko made in the beginning, which was thinking about like, yes, we need to have alternatives and disrupt all of this. And also like, this is how we live and survive and pay our bills and do all the things, right? And so I'm wondering if you all can help me think through this, right? So what does this mean, right? So like if we, I think that, I am of the opinion that, that we need to dismantle it and create anew, right? But what does that mean for my electric bill, right? What does that mean for being able to like feed myself, right? How do we reckon with that tension that is here that feel like, and it feels like, especially over the last, 10 months or so, it feels like the academy is becoming less and less a place where some of the more radical people can exist, right? And do the work they want to do. And so then what do we do, right? Like what is the answer? I'm sure that someone on this, one of you has the answer, right? Like what is the answer? You tell me what the answer is. I know that you have it and you've prepared it for this conversation. So if you could just give a very clear answer about what we should do now to make this tension not exist anymore, we're ready for it. You don't all unmute at the same time, though. I know that you're all fighting to answer at the same time.
Shay, I feel like we've had this conversation a couple times across the course of this last year, but I obviously don't know the answer. But I think about like where I feel like I am of most benefit to people, and to the communities that I feel answerable to, and that is, I'm not sure that that's in the academy. So I feel like I ended up in the academy by accident. Like I wanted to be a better literacy teacher. There were some things in the classroom that I recognized and didn't know what to do with. So I went back and got a PhD. And then it was like, oh, well, now I have this thing, and like this is what you do. And then I got this job, and now I'm here. And I'm like, is this the best place for me to be answerable to the communities that are important to me and that I want to be of service to? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, mostly I think no. So then what? So then is it time to go? That's a great question. Or is there a way for me to continue to pay my bills through the academy and do this work outside the academy? And I don't know the answer to that.
I do not have the answer. Surprise. It's, no one, this is the struggle. And so I don't have a lot of wisdom to offer, but this is where I sort of land on this. And I also want to acknowledge my own positionality. I mean, I'm a senior scholar, a full professor, a white woman. And so the way that these tensions come down on me are not the same as the way they come down on other folks. So I'm aware of that. But I just want to say this. In this society, there is no pure place. Every single institution is a white supremacist, settler colonial, racial capitalist, imperialist institution. There is no institution that is not implicated, right? So, I mean, this is obvious, just stating the obvious, right? And I think, and we're aware that the university is not just another institution. The university is a key institution that produces the knowledge, the surveillance systems, the weapons systems, the research, the policing systems, the violence, you name it, right? And we're in it, and we can't not be implicated in it. So, so having said that, right? I also think, and this, everyone may not, we may not all be on the same page in this. I do not want let them want them to have a single institution. I want to wage a fight in every institution in this society that we can. I think we need to wage a fight in our schools. I think we need to abolish the kind of education system we have now for something very different. But right now, we have millions of children, particularly Black and brown working class children, in public education. We have to fight in those institutions. And so I feel that way about the university too. And so I think, so this is not addressing the question of how can we do that in a way in which like we don't lose our jobs immediately or whatever. Like how can we do it and do it without compromising our politics at all, obviously. So that's a separate question that we could talk about. But I just want to say that I don't think we can resolve this tension. I think we have to live with the tension. And the main thing in living with the tension is that we have to, as many people have already said, we cannot compromise on our politics, particularly at this moment. We actually have to be bold. And I think our boldness, our collective boldness, not our individual boldness, is the only defense that we actually have. And it's about our collective work together. So we need each other to try to figure out how we deal with this on the moment by moment, day to day. That's all I got.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so I want to just sort of invoke an African-American Jubilee song that sort of corresponds with what we've been talking about a bit, but wade in the water. I'm not going to sing it, but this idea of wading in the water is really interesting to me, because as we're sort of talking about rambling, I sort of heard it as a wading, if you will, and which calls on me to sort of think about Christina Sharp's work of sort of or wake work, what it means to sort of live in the wake. And this is sort of in response to Pauline. I think we love deterministic outcomes or become accustomed to seeking deterministic outcomes in academia. And so I'm trying to think about what it means to work without resolution, right? Which I think is what many of, I think this is really what the conversation is calling us to sort of think about. What if we approach our work as if there is no resolution to it, right? Which for me is a call to sort of think about Cornel West's Black Prophetic Fire, in that he's thinking with Du Bois around these four essential questions that I think are really pertinent for how one might align their ethics, right, and their values. He asks these sort of questions of what does integrity do in the face of adversity and oppression? What does honesty do in the face of lies and deception? What does decency do in the face of insult? How does virtue meet brute force, right? The answer to these questions, certainly contradictory, will land differently depending on one's proximity to various struggles. But I think the through line for me is thinking about how do we take up these questions as if that is the work, right? The daily response is making an offering to and toward these particular questions. So yeah, I would invite us to do more rambling, right? To wade, if you will, to think about the potentialities of awake work, and in doing so, to kind of let go of this notion or this need for outcomes, right? I know tenure packets call for it. I know for the funders and the foundations all need them, right? Because doing that particular study is going to solve racial inequity, whatever that is. But how do we sort of work in ways, again, that resist sort of resolution?
That you just said, making an offering to these questions, and what that brought up for me is just the sacredness of the work that we are doing, and that these stories that we are entrusted with and that we have ourselves are really our sacred. And man, oh man, that is just beautiful. So just coming to this practice as a sacred practice is a beautiful reminder. Thank you.
Michiko, I was actually going to pick on something that you said, I think in some of your first comments in this space. and seeds, like how important seeds are. One of the things that where our conversation is right now and the energy of it is reminding me how grateful I am that I was able to start an advanced qualitative research course with all of us reading Braiding Sweetgrass. And that was one of our core texts. And so, midway through the class, we had a session about positionality, and I was able to, I did not do this on purpose. It actually happened to be on top of this particular book stack. But I was able to hold up this book and tell me what page she talks about her positionality on. It's every page. It's every single page. And I also want to acknowledge, Shay, the trickster in you, and how that is also such an incredibly vibrant part of communities that have refused, thank you, Audra Simpson, dispossession, actively refuse dispossession. It's a humor, there's dark humor, there's trickster, there's a hilarity, there's grief. I am constantly amazed at the cruelty of societies that don't allow people to grieve, because it's another way of denying life. When we deny people the ability to grieve, there's so much undealt with grief. And yeah, Michiko, I'm also very attentive to, we have spoken of our own stories, and I think there is such a humility and a respect that I see patterned in our responses. We've spoken from our own places and our own stories, because hopefully, I'm thinking of my colleague Vina Vasudevan, and she co-edited a book that is about care-based methodologies and how consent is a constant thing. So I feel that in all of us sharing just our own stories, and the people who have given us permission maybe to share a little bit about them, those stories. And I yes to incompleteness, because I think that does allow the space for being attentive to what is unfolding. When do we get to refuse a question? I was reading our grants officer is doing the grants person, he's doing what he's supposed to do. He sends around here's this grant, you can apply, here's about education. How do we close this gap, a very different gap than the kind of gap that Wilson was speaking about earlier. But how do we definitively close this gap? And I just thought, you arrogant ass, you think a study is going to undo what Sylvia Winter tried to get us to pay attention. Thank you again for invoking that. At first was what? The arrogance, the audacity, the caucasity. I cannot, I refuse. I love this sentence, I think, almost as much as I tell my mother I love her. I refuse. I absolutely refuse. How dare you diminish the power of the imagination by saying, definitively close the achievement gap. You made it. You close it.
So, and with that, we have three, I think so far we have three questions that have come through. If you all have questions, feel free to type them in the Q&A. We have about 10 minutes left. Time is both elastic and expansive and finite, because this is the academy, so there's finite time. But I want to raise first, there's a question in the Q&A that I think we kind of touched on already from Caleb, thinking about kind of activist approaches in qualitative research. What should one be willing to lose or let go of and willing to reconcile to stay committed? And I feel like we've kind of touched on that in the last question, but wanted to offer space if anyone had anything they wanted to add to that. And if not, that's totally fine, but I wanted to make sure that we raise that. All right. So then we have a question from Felice that says, this conversation brings to mind the debate surrounding the definition of authenticity and feasibility of being authentic under the current circumstances in educational institutions. As scholars and educators, can we truly be authentic, whether defined as sincerity, self-knowledge, or self-actualization? under the oppression created by neoliberal politics. Additionally, should we consider the activism and authenticity of educators and scholars in different contexts, such as various cultures and countries from different perspectives? Can we say that the oppression scholars encounter is the same in, let's say, Turkey and the US? And so I think the question is really just asking us to consider context and authenticity and how we show up, and would love for someone to offer their thoughts.
Can I offer the thoughts of someone else? Dr. Arlette Willis gave an Oscar Kazi address at the Literacy Research Association last December on authenticated knowledge as opposed to authentic knowledge. And so that to me was really impactful. So thinking less about like what is authentic and thinking more about like what can be authenticated by the communities that develop that generate this knowledge. And I think that she really did. She really shifted the way I was thinking about it, because that word always makes me uncomfortable. I'm like, authentic to whom? And she really sort of got at that by talking about authenticated things that can be authenticated by the communities that generate that knowledge, as opposed to what I think is authentic as an outsider or as a researcher.
Thank you for that. We've got another question from Latoya that says, I find tension as a Black woman doing research in Black spaces, even as I'm trying to change the system. I fear that things I do and write will be co-opted and corrupted to emphasize a deficit narrative that a neoliberal and racist society wants to keep in place to further goals. So I desire to do the work and push beyond to make changes, but struggle with the potential outcome at times. I often think about how people will quote MLK to fit their narrative, or in literacy research with Gloria Ladson-Billings. How do we account for the things that we cannot control?
But we control so little. Very, very little. And so I don't want to, Latoya, speak into what is the specificities that you raised. I can only speak from the specificities that I know and that I'm bringing with me. And I know I control almost nothing. So like when we think about a webinar being recorded, when I do talks, I'm often down like, would it be okay with you if we record? And certainly I've double thought that, I've double, I don't know. And then I remember like, oh, well, I can control relatively nothing. So go ahead, let's see what happens. Because I control very, very little, but I also, because I present and understood in a very, it fits into the binary that many people have about gender, that me being recorded is a very different thing than Shay being recorded consistently, than other people whose gender or sexuality I do not know. But because of the way I present, the way that people read me, Michiko, also shout out to people who are racially ambiguous, not to ourselves, but to other people. These are all things we have to consider, how we understand ourselves, how we're read. We control so little. So where do we feel connection? Where do we feel reciprocity? Where do we feel relation? Is much easier for me to lean into than a question about control.
And I think, oh, sorry, go ahead, Wilson. I was gonna say, there's a one of the last questions that is in the chat. It's kind of related to this idea of control, right? And navigating the lack of control, or and so there's a question about navigating researching the education institutions that are doing harm. And so just wondering kind of about how you get around, or how you navigate gatekeeping, right? Or how you, as an external researcher, how might you gain access when the institutions that you want to access are the ones that are doing harm? And so I don't know if anyone has suggestions or thoughts on that or the previous question, but I wanted to throw that out there as well.
When I think about people who are doing research on institutions that are actively doing harm, I think of the work of my friend and colleague, Dinora Sanchez Loza, and the ways that she goes into white communities that are actively doing harm and considers how that is being reproduced. And I think if you haven't read her research, it's fire. So I would encourage you to consider that.
I would add my colleague Heather McCambly, who does research on philanthropic organization, grant offering, fascinating work. And this is to do research on philanthropic organizations and late stage capitalism and hyper privatization. That's some courage.
So before we close out, I do have one more question for you, and then we'll close, and I'll kind of offer some more ways people can get involved with the QualLab. But I think that I want to close out our time together with a practice of looking forward. And so these days I am holding tightly to Dr. Robin D.G. Kelley's powerful insistence on freedom dreaming as an act of world building. And he writes, without new visions, we don't know what to build, only what to knock down. And so as we are looking toward what comes next, what are the new visions that you are dreaming up for this world and beyond? So I wanted to end it on a very easy, light question, just a little water cooler conversation.
I'm holding very much to the vision of a free, democratic Palestine from the river to the sea, which is not a, what is that word, chimera? It's not a phantom. It's on the horizon, and I'm working with a whole group of mainly young folks in Chicago and in information that we have, Education Workers for Palestine, and they're involved in many social movements, abolition, they're teachers or educators, community fights that they're involved in. And, I think we collectively, it's not nailed down, but we collectively have a vision that we don't have to live in this violent racial capitalist society, that actually we could build something fundamentally different. And so I think the freedom dreams are, at this moment, which seems in many ways very terrifying, I think their freedom dreams are alive and well on the streets of our city and in our schools and among our youth, the high school youth in Chicago. I mean, you have they're light years away from the rest of us, honestly. So I'm just hanging on to all these folks and learning from them and holding on to their freedom dreams. It keeps me going every day.
I hope that I know what I'm building with my mom. I know what I'm building with the people that I get to study with. I hope that I hope that more of us are building ways that we can, Shay, to bring back up, that we can age together, we can be young together, we can age together. I wish that everybody was able to care for their parents and be with them in these precious, precious years. This is building a reality that, again, neither she or I thought remotely this would be what we would be doing when I'm 53, she is 88. Never thought we would be doing this. It's fantastical. It unfolds every day, every evening with things that we cry so often. We laugh so often at the same time. I think I'm also really gifted to be able to build and imagine with other people. We do critical policy analyses, and then we make something that reduces harm or that creates a different reality. And we've done a lot of that work with the bills that I will just summarize them as denying the ability to live to lots of people. So we analyze those policies. That is an incomplete action. We also do something. So just being able to engage traditions that have stopped at critical and move them into abolition and creating, that's fantastic work. And I'm so grateful to be able to do that with other people.
I ask myself a lot, what is my role in the revolution? And because I don't know that I'm not very good at tearing things down. So much better at building things up. And so when I think about that and like where my skill set is, I think one of the things that one of my greatest privileges is supporting students in achieving their dreams. And so doctoral students in their research, master's students in refining their practice, undergraduates, and just coming into the practice. I've never met anybody who wants to be a teacher who's like, I'm going into this to harm children. So how do I help that? How do I build that in a way that is transformative and emancipatory? And then how do I support doctoral students who have come because they are trying to answer a question that has been sitting with them, probably discomforting them in a way that helps them to bring their freedom dreams into life. And that, I think, is where I find the most energizing work.
All beautiful. All beautiful. I'm thinking about what was named earlier, this idea around the neoliberal academy, sort of privileging individualism. And so I don't know that I'm sort of have a well-crafted dream, but I am most interested in dreaming alongside others, right? And so I'm trying to figure out, what possibilities exist in the classroom for us to dream together. What possibilities exist in writing projects to dream together, and not just sort of dream about or to shake scholarship, or to shake the idea of publication, right? What new genres become necessary? What new sort of artistic practices do we need to sort of invoke or tie into our practice, such that we can bring into view otherwise worlds, right? And I think that can only happen, to echo again what's been said throughout the conversation, in deep relation with those we're studying alongside, those we're in community with. And so, yeah, dreaming together, I think, is the only way. Maybe I'm thinking about Parable of the Sower, right? We talked about sort of the end of sort of the devastation that sort of caused, Parable of the Sower is sort of grappling with this destruction of society. But I'm most fascinated by how individuals actively think about, well, what type of world are we moving into, right? What type of world are we actively going to create? And there's a lot of crumbling happening around us. And so I think there's plenty of opportunity for us, again, to do that sort of dreaming alongside others.
Thank you so much for that. I think as I am thinking about the future and new visions, I find myself often returning to a poem that kind of grounds me in my role and what is possible, and what impossibilities, what it means to also embrace impossibilities. And I returned to a poem by the poet Danez Smith called Dear White America. And I'm just going to read the ending of it that I'm holding today. And so Danez writes, I've left Earth to find a place where my kin can be safe, where Black people ain't but people the same color as the good, wet earth. Until that means something, until then, I bid you well, I bid you war, I bid you our lives to gamble with no more. I've left Earth and I am touching everything you beg your telescopes to show you. I'm giving the stars their right names, and this life, this new story and history you cannot steal or sell or cast overboard or hang or beat or drown or own or redline or shackle or silence or cheat or choke or cover up or jail or shoot or jail or shoot or jail or shoot or ruin this, if only this one is ours. And so that is what I am holding, and that is how we will end this space. Before we go, I do want to just offer a couple of things, a couple of logistical things for folks who are here watching. Let me share my screen one more time. All right. So thank you to all of our panelists. You can learn more from our panelists through the different text on the screen. If you scan the QR code, it will send you to a page that has the links to all of these texts and more. It's really easy to get there. I think they're also putting in the chat. Shout out to Dr. Okello, who has a book coming out in October. We cannot wait to read it. I already know it's going to be amazing. And if you enjoyed watching this or being here, please, please, please check out and support the folks who were part of this conversation. Thank you all so much for engaging with us today, for connecting with the QualLab. Feel free to continue to stay engaged, visit our website, follow us on Twitter, or as Elon calls it, X, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will be uploading the recording of this video within the next week. And feel free always to reach out to us via email, quallab@osu.edu. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Please continue to stay engaged and also stay dreaming.